Let's consider the effects of a production subsidy to Boeing or Airbus in the context of a game theoretic setup where there are profits to be made through decreasing average costs, economies of scale in the aircraft industry. But those profits are bigger if a firm is the only firm. So we have a payoff matrix for Airbus and Boeing's payoffs are in the lower quadrant. So Boeing, for example, if Boeing produces, so we measure the profits from production here, and then not produce here, and then we think of Airbus, they can produce or not produce. If Airbus produces and Boeing produces, then we say that Boeing loses $5 million. If Airbus produces but Boeing does not produce, Boeing gets zero. If Airbus doesn't produce and Boeing produces, then they get $100 million. And if neither one of them produce, then they both get zero. Now we think about Airbus. If Airbus produces and Boeing produces, we'll assume that the firms are symmetrical, so Airbus gets minus $5 million. If Airbus does not produce and Boeing does produce, Airbus gets zero. If Airbus doesn't produce and Boeing doesn't produce, they get zero. And if Airbus produces and Boeing does not produce, Airbus gets $100 million. So now we ask ourselves what the Nash equilibrium will be in this game. So the way we proceed is by thinking about, well, suppose Boeing produces, what should Airbus do? So if Boeing produces, Airbus should not produce because 0 is less than minus 5. So this is then this outcome of Boeing producing and Airbus not producing is a potential equilibrium in this game. But there's another equilibrium in the game, which is if Airbus is producing, then Boeing should not produce, because if Airbus is producing and Boeing produces, Boeing would earn minus 5. So they don't want to do that. So we have two Nash equilibria in the game. It's easy to check that this outcome is not a Nash equilibrium. If Airbus is not producing, then Boeing should not produce. Boeing should produce. It would get 100 million if it didn't do that. And likewise, it's easy to see that this is not a Nash equilibrium, because if both of them are producing, then it's in each of their interests to not produce. So those can't be Nash equilibrium. So we have two Nash equilibria, and what we're interested in seeing is, well, how a subsidy to Boeing or to Airbus changes the nature of that Nash equilibrium. And so what we imagine, for example, let's imagine that Airbus gets a subsidy if they produce of $25 million. So now we can change the payoffs here. Instead of being minus 5, Airbus will get a profit of 20. So we write that in here. They'll lose 5, but they get the subsidy of 25, so they get 20. And if Airbus produces and Boeing does not produce, then they will get 125. So this subsidy of Airbus's to Airbus means that Airbus will produce, and when it does produce, Boeing's best response is to not produce. So now the only Nash equilibrium in the game is this one here, is where Airbus produces and Boeing does not produce. And Airbus then gets the 125. With that, it can repay the subsidy to the European Union and still have profits of 100. So that's how a subsidy, in some sense, by giving the airline a first mover advantage, enables it to have to enjoy the surplus that the other firm, the other national firm, then cannot enjoy. On the other hand, we have to think about the case where suppose that Boeing, even if Airbus was producing, Boeing had a small profit. So we imagine that Boeing has a profit of 5, even if Airbus is producing. So now we see the scenario where the Nash equilibrium would be different. So now the Nash equilibrium is going to be this one. Boeing's going to produce in either case. Airbus is going to produce in either case. So Boeing's going to make $5 million in profit. Airbus is going to make $20 million in profit. But remember, the subsidy was 25, and so the $20 million that Airbus makes is not enough to compensate all the subsidy, to repay the subsidy. So as before, Airbus, the European Union, in effect, is out $5 million, is losing. So knowing the cost structure of the other firm is very important in determining whether it's worthwhile to give a subsidy if the subsidy is intended to drive the other firm out of business.